Welcome to Philosophy 2005, Critical Thinking. Today's reading is Immanuel Kant's What is Enlightenment? An answer to the question, what is enlightenment? We're going to break this up into two sessions. I'm going to do a short video lecture today, get us about halfway through, and then we will continue with the rest of the text for Thursday's class. So this is for the 14th and the 16th. We'll start today with the 14th presentation, and then we'll have a second half later in the week. Let us begin at the beginning. I want to start with the term Aufklärung, enlightenment itself, in Kant's essay. So Kant's writing in German, and the question he's trying to answer is, Was ist Aufklärung? What is enlightenment? So I want to think about the word Aufklärung, and Aufklären in German means to shed light on something, to illuminate something. It can also mean to clear something out or to clear it up. A Klärung can mean both a clarification, shedding light on something. It can also mean a clearing, such as a forest clearing. Right? If you remove some trees in a small section of a forest, the light from above can shine down through the canopy and shed light on what's happening at ground level. Well, now what is this metaphor, this image supposed to suggest? Well, it suggests clearing away and shedding light on. What is being cleared away? Religious superstition, bigotry, and ignorance. What is being clarified? And what is having light shed on it? Well, the world, nature, human beings, everything is being clarified and having light shed on it. This light is thought of as sort of clearing the darkness away, the darkness of religious superstition, bigotry, racism, sexism, and the wonderful heritage of Western civilization in general up to this point. Okay, so the definition of enlightenment. Kant begins his essay, What is Enlightenment?, by giving us his answer to this question. He starts with his answer. Kant begins the essay with the following definition. Enlightenment, quote, enlightenment, is the human being's emergence from his self-incurred minority. Now, to understand what follows in his essay, we need to pay close attention to three aspects of his definition here. What does he mean by emergence? How does this emergence happen? What does he mean by self-incurred? How is the human being in a self-incurred position of minority? What does he mean by minority? Kant will develop his definition throughout this short essay, but these three questions will guide our reading and help us to come to a genuine understanding of what Kant takes enlightenment to be. We will also note problems and tensions in Kant's account. Let's start with minority. Unmündigkeit in German. Kant defines minority as the inability to make use of one's understanding without direction from another. In other words, it is the, legally, it's the condition of being a minor. Right? You can also think being in a condition in which you cannot consent, for instance, would be a condition of minority. You cannot offer consent. You are not old enough. You do not have the ability to use your own understanding without direction from another. Need someone else to sign for you or give permission for something. So the term minority here refers to being legally underage, not able by law to make certain decisions for oneself because one is not yet mature enough to act on one's own judgment. Kant is claiming that enlightenment is analogous to coming of age. But we should note that unlike in the social process where one becomes a certain age and is recognized as a mature adult, perhaps with ceremonies and such, here the human being emerges from self-incurred minority or immaturity. I want us to really think of what he's calling minority here as something like immaturity. That's my preferred translation choice. So Kant is not talking about something that just naturally happens when one becomes a certain age, nor something that occurs as a result of a social convention, such as church confirmation or a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, what have you. Now let's turn to the issue of what it means for this minority or immaturity to be self-incurred. Kant claims this minority is self-incurred when its cause lies not in lack of understanding, but in lack of resolution and courage to use it without direction from another. So humans are in a condition of self-incurred minority or immaturity from that moment when they have the ability to understand for themselves, but lack resolution and courage to do so. Unlike in the natural condition of minority or immaturity, when you lack understanding due to still being an adolescent, not being fully developed cognitively, physically, the kind of immaturity Kant has in mind here can characterize, and indeed has characterized, adults. One is here immature because one is too lazy, as he puts it, to use one's understanding without the help of another, or because one is too afraid to do so. Now, human nature becomes important in Kant's account here. He seems to claim that human nature here is characterized by the prevalence of laziness and cowardice. Because of these features, people remain under the direction of others even though they should have become adults. As adults, human beings should be autonomous and self-directing, but instead they are all too often the subjects of others. Why does Kant claim that human beings are lazy and cowardly? Not exactly the most constructive approach, perhaps, right? These are terms that denigrate and potentially can alienate an audience, right? Who you call lazy and cowardly? Not exactly the nicest terminology. What are the motivations, the reasons for being this way, according to him? Well, Kant is claiming that it's not so much that humans are, bad or something inherently evil. What he points out is it's comfortable and convenient to have others think and decide for us. We're busy, we're distracted, we have a lot going on. Leave it up to the experts. To direct ourselves would be troublesome, right? So, many believe that self-direction is dangerous even. It can lead us astray, we can make mistakes, and thus fear it, and would prefer that someone else take the risk for them and show them the way. This is where guardians and their important role come in. Kant introduces a class of guardians into his account, and this creates a tension in his argument. Remember, he has claimed that enlightenment is the emergence from self-incurred immaturity, but now it turns out that there are guardians who supervise the majority of humankind. And, quote, after they have made their domesticated animals dumb and prevented these placid creatures from daring to take a single step without the walking cart in which they have confined them, they then show them the danger that threatens them if they try to walk alone. This may or may not correspond exactly to your translation. It should be close enough. In any case, right, he's using this language of domestication here to describe the relation between guardians and their wards. It's not even, I think, a very helpful analogy when we're talking about the education of children. I think in general comparisons of humans to domesticated animals. Not a very good strategic approach. However, I think what he's getting at here is that the way guardians will treat human beings under their supervision does often almost approximate or amount to something similar to how humans take care of domesticated animals at times. In other words, I think it's a point of criticism. He's criticizing how guardians are performing their service of teaching people how to think correctly and what to do, providing us with advice for any questions we may have. Okay, so what guardians do here, he says, is make us afraid to do things our way and instead to rely on their guidance. And they do this by over-exaggerating the dangers of thinking for ourselves. What's the worst that could happen? We could make a mistake and be wrong and have to correct ourselves. That's not so terrible, right? But they want to make that seem as though that's the worst possible thing that could happen to us, that kind of humiliation. And the end result then of this is we are encouraged to be afraid of being humiliated, afraid of making mistakes, and having that publicly brought to our attention. Now he next claims if guardians didn't do this, people would learn, right? So if they didn't make us afraid in this way, with humiliation and exaggerated threats, people would learn that the use of their own understanding and self-direction are really not so dangerous, and after a few mistakes, one can successfully be autonomous. He compares this to a child learning to walk. And he says what guardians do is analogous to what a parent or a nurse or a nanny might do if they were so afraid of a child, a toddler, falling down while learning to walk that they put that child into what the Germans called a Gangelwagen at this time. And this was something like a harness, a contraption that made it possible for toddlers to walk without falling. So it protected them from bumping their heads. But the problem is that young children put in these devices never really learned how to properly walk on their own in the first place. That is, it actually slowed down their ability to learn to walk. And I think he's saying something similar happens when, for instance, as children, we are treated in a similar manner, basically, by our parents, our role models, the authorities in our lives, and our teachers. We are put into a sort of Gangelwagen, a contraption that frees us from having to worry about doing things for ourselves, but the ultimate price we pay is that we never actually develop autonomy, something along those lines anyways. Now, when Kant speaks of guardians, I want us to be clear here that he means such individuals as school teachers, professors, authors, priests, pastors, rabbis, politicians, intellectuals, talking heads, pundits, columnists, anybody who wants to tell other people what to do and how they ought to be thinking about something and does this publicly and maybe makes a living at it would fall into this category. Guardians, Kant is claiming, make people dumb and prevent them from acting on their own by making people fear the consequences of autonomous action. Because of this, people become stuck in immaturity, or minority, as he puts it. Being stuck in immaturity is characterized by Kant as a condition where, instead of using one's own understanding, one makes use of precepts and formulas that these guardians have provided for us. Slogans, talking points. After being conditioned and trained by guardians, why does Kant claim that even if people tried to become independent, they would struggle to achieve independence and autonomy? Well, as he puts it, people would not be used to acting autonomously, and because they would not be used to it, they would be feeble and uncertain in their attempts, at least initially, and this is how it should be, actually, right? At first, there's a hesitation and uncertainty at doing something that you're not used to doing. I mean, this actually maps on to Plato's allegory of the cave, right? When the philosopher returns from the sunshine into the cave, there's this issue of the eyes being dazzled, adjusting to the darkness again, coming in from the light, just like when the philosopher emerges from the cave into the light, there's a period of adjustment, getting used to the bright light after being in darkness for so long. And I think Kant is onto something similar here. When you make the transition from having your thought determined heteronomously by others to determining your own thought for yourself autonomously, there's something similar going on here where you're kind of on weak knees, unable to see clearly for a little while. It is disorienting. And that is how it must be, at least initially, until you've adjusted. Now, let's continue on and start to talk about how the emergence from immaturity happens. And I think we'll talk about how Kant is conceiving the emergence from immaturity or minority, and then we'll stop for today and finish the rest later this week. Now, Kant, it might seem like it's impossible for autonomous thought to happen at all in this scenario. Guardians are essentially making people afraid to think for themselves, so how would anyone ever get from a condition like this where I have been essentially trained to let experts do my thinking for me and to simply repeat back to them what they have given to me, well, how is it possible then that anyone ever becomes mature and able to reason for themselves? Well, Kant talks about individuals here against the grain almost. He says there are a few who, in spite of the general condition of subjection to guardians, manage to become self-directed. How do they do this? How does this sort of exceptional situation happen? Well, the few exceptions become mature, enlightened, as Kant puts it, by their own cultivation of spirit. So they do this in spite of what the guardians are attempting to do, right? In spite of that, just like in Plato's allegory of the cave, right? In spite of the fact prisoners are chained to their seats with their faces directed forward, in spite of that, somehow, and it's a mystery. It must appear mysterious in this kind of a framework here, how a single prisoner somehow, right, the chains break or are loosened, and now this prisoner is able to move around and see where they really are. Well, likewise, right, how does anyone become enlightened or autonomous here? At first it happens despite what the system is set up to accomplish, and it only happens rarely and infrequently. It's almost as though you have this new precious plant. He's going to talk about seeds and plants here shortly, but it's almost like you have this rare plant that requires very special conditions for it to be nurtured and blossom. And despite its environment not being conducive to its flourishing, yet you still manage to find a few of these flowers here and there, seeming to overcome tremendous odds. So, at first then, enlightenment is something that happens rarely, infrequently, and among individuals who are in a kind of tension with society of their time. Now, a public, Kant thinks, can become enlightened. You can actually have enlightenment move from just being a sort of exceptional feature of rare individuals to something that is a mass phenomenon. A public can become enlightened, Kant claims, well, what does he claim here? What is the necessary condition for public enlightenment? Well, according to Kant, freedom is. And here he means, something like political freedom. The ability, for instance, to argue and debate matters of public importance without fear and without having to be worried about adverse consequences for saying what you believe and for voting as you determine it. So political freedom is what's necessary, he thinks, for public enlightenment. If you simply leave a public alone to freely debate matters, this public will become enlightened. Now, without this kind of freedom, political freedom, can we assemble together? Can we speak our minds freely? Can we protest injustices and make our voices heard? Clearly, without freedom, one can hardly be able to direct oneself or lead others to self-direction. So in conclusion, some individuals are enlightened, and some of these individuals belong to the class of guardians, according to Kant. These exceptional guardians promote enlightenment by spreading the spirit of irrational valuing of one's own worth. Right? Human beings have dignity, and each one of us is capable of thinking for ourselves, and of the calling of each individual to think for himself. Each one of us is called to think for ourselves, and this is not something anyone can do for us. This development, these kinds of enlightened guardians, even if they're a numerical minority of the total guardians in any given society, right? This development, together with the condition mentioned above, political freedom, makes public enlightenment possible. All right, we'll let that suffice for today, and we will carry this discussion of Kant's essay on enlightenment further in just a few days. Take care. Bye.